Greetings. This is Dennis Fair, retired member of the Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C. I retired in 2019, June the 8th. I was appointed June the 4th of 1990. I'm no longer affiliated with the Metropolitan Police Department or any law enforcement agency. So the opinions that you see or hear on this YouTube channel will be entirely mine. Some individuals had asked me, what is it like being a police officer? What is it more or less to expect once you choose the career from the beginning to actually becoming a police officer and appointed and being on the street? Well, the first thing you have to take into consideration is that something you want to do, and are you even qualified? Because there are a lot of things that for a regular job you're not going to have to go through. For example, a polygraph test. That's something that most police agencies are going to require you to submit to a polygraph test. And of course, for whatever reason, if you do fail that, you will not be considered. Another thing that most agencies now require, of course, is good credit. Now, a lot of individuals don't feel that that's necessary. I have my own personal opinions on it, because you can have perfect credit and still have dishonorable mentality and still do things that are dishonorable, like steal. Because you have good credit doesn't mean that you're not going to do something as far as stealing. There's been a lot of situations where some of your famous celebrities have stolen out of stores when they had millions in the bank just simply because they could get away with it. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a need to steal to steal. So my verdict is kind of out on the whole credit thing, but there is a credit requirement in most police agencies, because they feel if you are in the negative or financially in the rear, it's very likely that you will probably be likely to take some money or drug recovery, few $100,000. You might put maybe 10,000 in your pocket. It's just you and some fellow officers who's going to miss the money. So they look at it like that, but that doesn't mean that having bad credit, you will do that. It doesn't mean having good credit, you won't. So it's a thought, but regardless, that's something that they do take into consideration as far as making a choice of whether you will be considered or not. If your credit is at a certain level, that's I'm not sure what they consider. Every agency is different, but if you have bad credit, let's just put it that way, whatever's considered bad, it's very unlikely that you'll be chosen. Should that matter? Should it not? I don't really understand it. It depends, because it's an individual situation. It depends on the individual. No individual is the same. Also, be a drug test. I know marijuana is legal for the most part in most areas. So they're going to test you for drugs. Should you come up positive for marijuana or something like that, or any drug for that matter, and you don't have a prescription for it, very unlikely that you'll be hired. It depends as far as medical situations. Certain drugs, obviously something like Percocet. If you got Percocet in your system and you don't have a legitimate medical situation or a reason why it's in your system, unlikely that you'll be even considered. Things like education, I think with the Metropolitan Police Department, they require an associate degree or equivalent credits. Which, do you need that? My personal opinion, I don't consider having the knowledge of college credits meaning that you're going to be a better police officer. Because I've seen officers with degrees and they've done some of the stupidest things that you can even imagine. I'm talking common sense wise. So that's something that most agencies have implemented, thinking that they will get better candidates if they implement a college degree requirement. But Metropolitan Police Department, for one, they have, I think, associate degree you need now. They didn't need that in 1990 when I came on. But you have to have an associate degree, or I believe equal credits to associate degree. They will even assist you in getting it, depending on your situation. You may attend the local university, UDC, and get there while you are actually an officer. That's some type of program they have. But it's something that all agencies don't have, but it is something that you need to take into consideration depending on what agency you apply for. Also, of course, you have to have a driver's license. Driver's license, not only will you need a driver's license, your driving record will play a role in it. If you have numerous moving violations and lots of violations on your record, your driving record, that's something you're gonna have to take care of before you even be considered. I mean, you're gonna have to pay them off, and depending on what types of points you have on your license, on your license status as far as points for moving violation, you will not be considered. That's something else to take into consideration. And of course, they do a physical fitness test. The day that like I said, that's a very preliminary stage to see if you're even able to drag the dummy. Things like running at a certain up steps, down the steps. You may have to fire a replica of a Glock twice in both hands. Things like that. Every department physical ability test is different, so that will be something that you'll have to complete and pass. Climb a fence, and these will be timed physical fitness tests that you have to complete before also being considered. And most of the time, in these particular situations, you'll be also fingerprinted. The fingerprinting will be done to see if you have a criminal history, and actually to see if you're wanted. I know years ago in the 90s, the Metropolitan Police Department, had hired a lot of individuals, and it came out there was a mad rush of hiring, and some individuals actually had criminal past that had been overlooked. They were terminated, and some of the individuals were actually in the academy and were pulled out of the academy while attending class and taken out of the academy and either arrested for warrants that for somehow were missed or what have you. So it can happen. So they do this fingerprinting a lot of times at the preliminary stage so that you don't even waste the department's time by even getting further into it. If you have felonies or misdemeanors, in most cases, you're not going to even be considered. There are some situations, depending on the misdemeanor, if you can get it expunged, you may still be considered as an applicant. But in most cases, if you have a criminal history, it's not going to happen. It's just not. So it's a very, very difficult process to even be considered. A lot of times, most individuals will tell you, why would you even want to do that? You're a sellout, or why would you want to be the feds, or you hot? Most individuals on the outside looking at will tell you that. Well, in reality, it's almost equivalent to getting in the NFL or NBA. Most individuals will never even qualify. You just not. I mean, the bottom line, the average individual a lot of times may have some type of criminal history. So that's going to foul you out right there. You also may not be able to pass that polygraph test. That's going to foul you out. If you don't have those associate degree or more or whatever they consider as far as that's concerned, that's going to foul you out. Driving record is screwed up. You have a history of reckless tickets and moving violations, you're not going to even be considered. Also, the drug test. You got drugs in your system, marijuana, what have you, or some type of drug with no prescription, not going to even be considered. Also, of course, they look at a lot of other things as far as your physical abilities, whether or not you are tested, and of course they test individuals for a lot of things once you get to a physical part of it, meaning you'll have a physical, and if there's something wrong or you have some type of situation health-wise that may prevent you from doing a job, you're not going to be considered. So it's actually a lot of different qualifications that you have to pass that the average individual just does not have all those. Most individuals may have something that they might have done when they was young. Yeah, but man, I was in high school when that happened. That was years ago. Unfortunately, if it's not expunged and it's still on your record, depending on what it is, in most cases, you're not going to even be considered. You almost have to live a perfect life up to a certain point. And then, after all that's considered, and I'm thinking if I left anything out, let's see. The post says polygraph, of course, drug tests, fingerprinting for criminal history, of course, the further line, the credit check, driving record. You have to have a driver's license. Of course, you have to be a U.S. citizen. Things like that. A lot of times it sounds like it's simple, but most individuals a lot of times have one or more of those situations. They might have a possession for a marijuana charge years ago. It's nothing current, but it's still there. You may have a negative credit history. Your credit might be messed up. You're trying to work on that, but it's still there. So you're not going to be considered. So with all that being said, you still have to pass the exam, the written exam. I'm not even talking about the physical part of it where you drag the dummy and jump over the fence, run up the steps, come down the steps, and it depends on what agency you're applying for as far as what those qualifications are. So even with all that being said and done, there's no study guide for this written exam that you're going to take. A lot of times, I don't recall how many questions it was. It may be maybe 100 questions. Who knows now? I don't honestly know. But each jurisdiction has a written exam. You got to get past that. If you don't get past that, you're done. So there are a lot of things to consider if you're going to look into a career in law enforcement. I'm trying to summarize some of the things that a lot of times the recruiters, and some things are not really in layman terms that are on websites, and what to expect if you choose to apply or think about it or give it consideration. A lot of individuals don't want to do it because of the negative, the negative perception of law enforcement. But on the same note, if you're complaining about it, why don't you change it? Why don't you go into some of these academies since you're unhappy with the individuals that's on the street? Why not apply? Why not change things? Since you're saying, and most times a lot of people think that the police are biased, and some of them are. I'm not going to sit here and play pro-police because I'm not. There are some extremely bad police. They do exist, like with any occupation. However, a lot of individuals will discourage you from even attempting to apply for something like this. And I actually received a lot of resistance from family member friends when I was accepted into the academy. I lost a lot of friends. A lot of people viewed me as the so-called sellout. Oh man, I can't believe you chose that. But 2021, I'm retired, and a lot of the same individuals that said that to me are still working, and I'm nowhere near retirement. And I'm not saying that to put them down, but the same individuals that looked down on me when I chose that occupation, now it's kind of ironic. We see him, and I had one. I'm not going to even call his name, but the individual actually told me at my 50th birthday party, he said, "Man, I wish I had done what you did." He says, "I'm still working. I'm nowhere near retirement." He said, "If I had chose that occupation, I'd be retired too now." But you didn't choose, and it's not for everybody because it's a lot more to it once you actually, and if you actually make it out of the academy to make it to the street. There's much more to it, which I intend to go into without cutting it up and making it look sweet, because there's nothing sweet about it. It's not. It's a very stressful career, and it takes its toll on your family. If you're married, it takes its toll on your wife. And they told us in the academy when we entered that the majority of the individuals, they asked, who's married? Some people were married, and they raised their hands and said, well, take into consideration a lot of you individuals that are married, if you do reach the end of this academy, a lot of you all will be divorced. Now, obviously, you can't say that, but they said it back then because you have to say most things that are politically correct, even if they're not. They rather you not know the truth than tell you the truth and offend you. And that's just one of the problems of some of the academy training. They don't really go into a lot of the training that you should have, and that's a whole nother story that I'll also go into a discussion of. But just really just trying to discuss the qualifications and what to expect if you choose this occupation. And it's a very lucrative occupation financially. You will make a lot of money. Sometimes you will make money when you don't want to make money. That means when your shift is over, your shift won't be over because something will happen and you're not going home. Once you get there, it's not a 9 to 5. Once you get there, if something transpires toward the end of your shift, you are held over. You won't be going home. So it's a lot of things to take into consideration. If you have children, need to take to school or whatever, most cases you're going to have to make arrangements or have a backup plan, because a lot of times you're not going to be able to do it, depending on whether you have to go to court or whether some tragic event occurs, or if there's a shooting or some form of crime scene that you're going to be held on for a few hours, because things just happen. And it's not a 9 to 5. It's very stressful, but you have to know how to work around that. And everybody can't do it. And this occupation is just not for everybody. I would encourage individuals, if you choose to watch this video and there are questions that you have, enter them in the comments and I'll try to answer them, or have a video that deals with specifically some of the questions that individuals ask. A lot of times individuals ask, what type of stress do you have as far as the academy? The academy is a lot of stress because you're in a controlled environment. It's not the same as being on the street, but you still have to do physical fitness activities, and you also have to retain a lot of information. I know in the Metropolitan Police Department, not sure what it's like now. If you fail three tests, you out of the academy. So you can't necessarily keep your status in the academy if you don't maintain a certain level. What it is now, I don't know, but you're going to have to retain a lot of information. You're going to be tested on the information, and still you're going to have to do physical fitness and all types of things like that, which deals with handcuffing, all types of restraints and things of that nature. But you have to do this and still maintain a home life, and you're going to have some time at home to study, because it is a lot of information that you will be tested on. Meaning you can't go home and I'm going to hang out with the fellas and that is. I didn't go out one time during the whole 4 months of my academy. Not one time, but also maintain a B average through the entire academy. Some individuals, excuse me, won't take it very seriously. They'll continue to try to live the same life they lived before the academy, and a lot of those individuals won't make it out. If you have an unstable setting, there's a lot of noise or whatever, you won't really be able to study, things like that. You're going to need some quiet time. It's going to be a whole lot of weekends. You're not going nowhere. You're going to be in those books, because the codes for laws and things of that nature, and regulations for traffic violations, there's so much to retain. You're not going to have the opportunity to go out and do the things you used to do. You're going to have to pretty much shut down. A lot of your friends will be unhappy. I can't believe you not going out in the academy. Man, you can go out one night. Nope, that's okay. I pass. But it requires a lot of discipline. So some individuals, will be able to adapt to that circumstance, especially if you are from college or you come from college or background, you're pretty much used to studying and used to taking tests. Some individuals that are not proficient in test taking may not make it out of the academy. You may be physically fit, you may be all of that, but when it comes down to the academics of retaining information, taking those tests, you just may not be the one for that. So again, you'll be naturally, exiting the academy. You won't make it. You won't even make it to the street. So I just wanted to discuss what it's actually like to, for the most part, enter the academy, and kind of what to expect in the preliminary process of being chosen. Of course, there'll be a background check. If you do pass all the preliminary stuff like the physical and the record check, the credit check, and all those things, there'll be a serious background check where the investigators will look into your background deep, but they may actually come out to neighbors' houses and inquire like what type of individual you are, things of that nature. And this is all even prior before you even enter an academy. There's a lot that goes into it before you even get close to the academy. And most people, like I said, a lot of times don't even make it past the physical fitness part of dragging the dummy, climbing the fence, running up down the steps. A lot of individuals don't even make it past that. So if anything, you have to be in some form of shape. Do you have to be a Navy SEAL? Absolutely not. But you have to be in some form of shape to continue throughout that academy, or even get in that academy, because you're going to be doing physical fitness as well. One of the also things that you have to take into consideration is the life you lived prior to that. You may not be able to do the same things. Drinking excessively, things like that. It's going to be very hard to be at academy 7 or 6 in the morning, starting off, and then the first thing you might be going on a few mile run, and after heavy drinking, you're not going to make it. So a lot of things that you actually are used to doing at home or with friends, family, it's just going to have to come to a halt. It'll all boil down to what you consider a priority and what you don't consider a priority. Some individuals are going to actually laugh and be like, man, I can't believe you don't go out no more, you don't do this. But what's more important, what your friends and family think or your career? It's something you need to take into consideration. I encourage individuals to look into it if you do meet the qualifications, because constantly complaining about the types of law enforcement officers that are out there and how they're treating you, you can't really complain if you're not even willing to attempt to go in the academy or encourage somebody to go into to change things. If you have a bunch of individuals in your perception that you think don't look like you patrolling your neighborhood, why don't you encourage others that qualify to enter the academy, to change the dynamics if you're not happy with the individuals? Now, I know personally some of the recruiters I spoke with have actually told me that they couldn't find a lot of individuals in DC they met the qualifications. So a lot of times they would go and travel as far as New York, Maine, all types of places to get recruits because DC had a stigma. Most individuals that were qualified were encouraged not to. So, oh, man, you don't want to do that. You got some individual on the side telling you what you should do or shouldn't do. And a lot of times individuals had prior criminal history, dirty urine, credit wasn't in order. Now, to top it all off, and this is what topped everything. At one time, you didn't need an associate's degree, but now you need an associate's degree. So, for the most part, the average DC resident does not have all those things in order. Because I know at my time of being an applicant, I didn't have an associate degree. I was in college. I dropped out of college. I was at UDC majoring in criminology. Once my appointment came, I dropped out of college faster than Kanye West on some of the things he's done. But I dropped out. However, the thing is, with that is dropping out to pursue a career is something totally different versus just randomly dropping out. The thing is, the average citizen, as I said before, does not have an associate's degree. The average individual does not have perfect or acceptable credit. The average individual does not have clean urine. The average individual can't pass that physical fitness part. The average individual, a lot of times, just does not have some of these things in order. You have to have, for the most part, all of the things I named in order to even be considered. And some of the things like a driver's license, yeah, we take that for the most part, Grant. The average person may have a driver's license, but guess what? They don't even want to see the driver's license, the fact that it's valid. That's expected. We want to see your driving history. We want to see what kind of tickets you got. Says here you got 7 moving violations and reckless driving charge, although you were given a ticket in Virginia on Highway 95. That's something you have to address. If you have those on your record, they're going to have to be expunged. You're going to have to go to driving school or something. They're not going to accept you. Basically, for the most part, you almost have to walk a straight line, or as the youngers say, be a square to even be considered. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, it's not worth it. I'm not doing all that. Yeah, that sounds good. In reality, it's not so much that you're not doing all that. You don't even qualify to do it. It is very, 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 very stressful as far as trying to get into a situation where you don't have at least one of those. And that's the problem. A lot of individuals can't do it, and it doesn't make that individual that does do it a perfect. We've seen individuals get through the academy, come on the street, and become some of the worst officers they are. So you can actually get through all that and still be a problem officer. It's just no perfect officer. It's just not going to happen. But it does change the dynamics if you do enter an academy, if you're unhappy with the way things are going on the streets and you want to change the dynamics of law enforcement. Why not apply? You talking about it, you complaining about it. Okay, do something about it. You have a college education or you have some type of background in college. Why not apply? So you can't really talk about it and complain about it if you're not going to do something about it. My thing is, do something about it. I chose to do it. I chose to apply myself. I didn't have a criminal history, and there are a lot of other things that I had to correct as far as what else did I have to correct during that time period? There was something that I had to correct. I'm not sure what it was. It might have been something as minor as a contact or individual. They would send letters out. Back then, they wouldn't come in and that's necessarily interview individuals. They would send letters out, and then you fill it out. Somebody's your friend or something, or somebody's mom, fill it out, and they have to send it back in. But they had to get all those back, and a lot of times they wouldn't necessarily come out and interview them in person. And I think I had one individual that I put down as a reference, and when they sent the letter out, the individual didn't even fill it out, or they filled it out, never mailed it. And I had to press that person to do that because I needed that in to complete my status. And eventually they did send it in, and I was appointed. And it was different. The police academy was different then. It's not like that now, but the instructors were very hard. They talked to you anyway. It was kind of like the military. Now you can't even call new officers rookies. You can't do a lot of stuff because it's not politically correct. Something else I don't necessarily agree with, because they're going to be called much worse when they get out of the academy. So the training is somewhat watered down in most agencies because just don't want to offend anyone. And trust me, if you take the career and you do make it to the streets, you're going to be called everything but your name. So doesn't matter if you black, don't matter if you white, don't matter what your race is, you're going to be called every type of name that exists. So that's something else on a whole nother agenda that I plan to discuss as well. But I encourage individuals to put some questions in the notes, or if you have questions about it, subscribe. I'm going to go into a lot of things that discuss some of the law enforcement, some of the problems in law enforcement, because there are a lot of problems in law enforcement that are not addressed. There are a lot of problems that you won't see on the news. There are a lot of things that are covered up in law enforcement that most individuals have an idea. But speaking as one from law enforcement, there are a lot of things that your average citizen doesn't know, but assumes this way when it's really the opposite. I intend to discuss some of these things and answer some questions in the comments of individuals that just have some questions. You know, I'll go into training. I'll go into what's being now improperly trained. I'll go into why this happened and this shouldn't have happened. There are a lot of things you see on TV that could have been avoided because poor training, poor decisions from the law enforcement officer. It's a lot. There's a lot. Then I also go into well-being once you are out of the academy, once you are actually an officer, as far as to professionalism, something that's not really it's not really discussed so much in training. You don't get that. A lot of times you get the basics, the handcuffing, things of that nature, what to expect, and it's just a lot. But there is so much missing, like professionalism. They don't really go into professionalism. Is how to talk to individuals versus talking down to individuals. You go in somebody's home that doesn't necessarily look like what your home may look like. You can't go in there and like with a smirk on your face or frowned up. You have to treat the individual just like you would treat anybody else. In the back of your mind, you might be thinking, how in the world is, might be all types of stuff going on, animals, whatever. But you can't take that into a mindset and have stereotype of that individual. Regardless of how that individual lives, you're there to do a service and for the most part, take a report or what have you. Don't make the person feel worse than they already feel if they were a victim of a crime. A lot of times you have individuals, law enforcement, they do it so often that they may be on the scene of a homicide, for example, and you'll look and you'll see individuals on the news, but the law enforcement officers will be laughing, and it's not that they're laughing at the scene itself. They may be discussing a football game or basketball game because they do this so often. But to the individual that's on the outside looking in, my cousin is laying in the street with gunshot wounds. He's dead. They're maintaining the crime scene, but on the same note, they're not. They're smiling and laughing like, okay, they think this is a joke. It's not that, but they're just going on with what normally goes on. They normally have discussions. That's their 9 to 5. That's just a regular work day to see a dead body. However, to that individual that sees these officers laughing, trust me, they don't feel that way. That's one of the worst things you can see is an officer smiling, even if they're just conversating among themselves, if it's your loved one deceased in the street. I understand how that goes, but on the same note, that's an example of the professionalism that's not taught in the academy. They're not going to tell you in the academy, hey, look, on the crime scene, and you got a very sensitive situation, if you can't refrain from smiling or smirking or having a discussion with fellow officers that might result in laughter because the cameras are filming you and you don't know what the other person or that loved one that's in emotional shock is thinking of you. So a lot of times you just have to maybe talk, cover your mouth as you speak to the officer so you don't see smirk. Nobody's saying not to talk, but some of the things I've seen on some of the crime scene, individuals were extremely unprofessional, frustrated that they had to stay. They couldn't get off on time. So a lot of times they're treating individuals that are coming to the scene like, hey, excuse me, what's going on? A lot of the officers are snapping back, going off on the individual, and all the individual did is ask the question. Now, of course, somebody's loved one is on the ground, deceased. They're not going to be the happiest. So you can expect for individual to be just going wild, going crazy, trying to get into the crime scene. You still have to maintain professionalism and try to restrain that individual as much as you can. And sometimes I've seen individuals handcuffed. They weren't placed under arrest, but handcuffed because they were trying to get to the body. That's their loved one laying down, but also still a crime scene. So we have to preserve the crime scene, but also keep that loved one in check as well, because that individual gets to the crime scene dragging the body. That's in the individual actually basically penetrating the crime scene and disturbing the crime scene, and that will matter in court. So it's a very difficult position to be in, but professionalism, unfortunately, is lacking. And you have to be professional when you deal with individuals, even if the individual is not being professional to you. You don't expect them to be professional to you. Sometimes if that individual is a victim, if that individual is just arrested, naturally they're not going to be nice to you. They're not going to be like, well, officer, I really appreciate this. You've been really nice. Nah, they're going to be talking all types of craziness. You're going to be called everything out of the book. Still got to maintain your professionalism, and you can't take out you can't take out what that individual is saying simply because they're talking or calling you names. You still got to do a job. If individuals just calling you names or what have you, you just got to take that for what it's worth. That's part of the job. Being called out your name or being called all types of racial slurs is part of the job. Whether you be black, white, or whatever, you're going to get called some things. And that's one of the problems I have with the training. A lot of times the training won't have scenarios where a hostile crowd or hostile individual is calling you out of your name. And these individuals often don't experience this until they get out of the academy. And what happens when they get out of the academy and an individual calls them something crazy, or they don't know what to do because they haven't experienced it. And a lot of times they react with the same emotion. If an individual calls you out of your name, what have you, freedom of speech is nothing you can do as a law enforcement officer for the most part. You can't do anything. You might want to do something, but you can't. And unfortunately, everybody doesn't see it that way. Certain officers, you call certain names or you say the wrong thing to get up on them, you're going to have a problem. The officer's going to find something basically and, do something that somehow and try to justify it as being legal to get back at you. Now, is that right? Absolutely not. If an individual is just talking and calling you names, is not obstructing anything as far as traffic or causing any harm, there's nothing you can do but listen or even, go away. If you're no longer wanted on the scene, you leave. The individual can talk all day, but if you're not there, the individual clearly will eventually just go away or just stop talking. But those are some of the problems in law enforcement. The training is lacking. It's something that I have brought up. When I was in law enforcement doing the training classes, they give you a survey to fill out a lot of times. Hey, what do you think of this class and what would you like to see done? I would fill out a lot of times a survey. And most officers, after the training, they've gone. They want to get out of there. And I can understand that. But a lot of the training was watered down toward the end. A lot of the training that we should have had every year wasn't had. A lot of training that they should have right now, it's not being had. It's a lot of training now that's repetitive just to cover the departments and more or less of insurance. Hey, we did teach them this, but it's more or less so that this won't happen. But there are a lot of things that simple professionalism, how to talk to citizens, where they won't have individuals actually come into these academy classes and talk. Why don't we bring the academy, bring the individuals into the academy so they can tell officers what's wrong? Hey, I would appreciate it if you guys don't say this or do this when you come in the neighborhood, or why does that you do this? Bring some citizens in and ask questions. Let them ask questions and let the officers engage. Now, I'm not into having a screaming match and all that, and it might get heated, but they've gotten away from that. They've gotten away from actually bringing the citizens in and let the citizens speak to some of the law enforcement individuals that are higher up and explaining to them what's wrong. Hey, why can't the officers do this versus do that? These are all things that need to be done. A lot of the training, like I've said it before, is just not there. There are a lot of things that officers have no clue of. They don't learn until they get with a reserve. I mean, not a reserve, a training officer. And a training officer, a lot of times, the recruiter is only as good as the training officer. Now, if you get a training officer that doesn't know anything or has a little bit amount of time, you basically got two individuals that don't know what they're doing patrolling the streets. I've seen that too. And it happens because a lot of the veterans are gone. Why would an individual stay? For the most part, when your time is up, you get out of there. I know I did. And I was offered $70,000 to return as a senior police officer. Absolutely not. A lot of family members, friends, like, how could you turn down that kind of money to go back as a senior police officer and still collect your pension and do the same thing you was doing? There are a lot of reasons why I turned it down. Something else I'll go into on some further videos. But like I said, this is the first video I was supposed to have been done this, but there are a lot of things that have been going on with the whole COVID situation, and I wasn't able to do it. I had told some individuals that inquired about a career in law enforcement that I would do this because some of the questions I had already answered, but then their friends had questions that they wanted to answer. And it was like me repeating myself. So I said, you know what, maybe I should do a video, and they'll see the video. I'll send them the link. And others that are inquiring about law enforcement or just have simple questions. Hey, look, can the police do this? Can they just stop me and search my vehicle? There are a lot of things that people actually don't know. And sometimes, you can ask somebody and they may not know. For example, I had an individual said, the police, they arrested me, but they didn't read me my rights. They don't have to read you your rights when they arrest you. They only have to tell you what you've been arrested for, and for the most part, only Mirandarize you if they start to ask you questions pertaining to the crime that you've been charged with. So if an individual is not questioning you, don't have to read your rights at any given time. That's TV. A lot of times there are a lot of things that go on TV that it's not real. It's not real. It's perspective. Like in most cases, people think that the police departments have a quota. In some police departments, jurisdictions may have a quota, but there was never a quota in the District of Columbia. And actually, if there was a quota, it was not something that was, how can I say this? It was not something that was actually physically in the books per se. For example, you might have a sergeant say, hey, look, I need 10 tickets. I need 10 tickets or 5 parkers. They might tell you that before you go on the street, but that wasn't something that was mandated. There was nothing in the books or quota that was on a record. That just, for the most part, was your sergeant telling you he wanted to see something that you had done, or at least you had done some form of work. Now, they gotten away from even saying that. They don't say any of that, anything like that now. But some jurisdictions may have some type of incentive, and that's a tricky one, because if you got an incentive that's going to give rewards for a certain amount of arrest or a certain amount of tickets, you're going to have officers starting to lean a little to the left versus leaning to the right and doing the right thing. Some things that may not look illegal to the average person going to start to look illegal to the officer, meaning you're going to start stretching things. You're going to start basically using your imagination just to get to whatever that incentive is. So most incentives and things like that are discouraged, although there are some law enforcement agencies that do have them. I know years ago there were incentives for certain arrests or amounts of arrest, and individuals would be able to have the weekends off for a month and things of that nature, which is something that was totally wrong, because you have individuals going and for the most part doing all types of things just to get some days off. And that's a problem. When you are competing for days off, you're going to go out there and some of the stuff is going to be legit, but they're going to have some individuals that's going to write bogus tickets. You're going to have individuals that write tickets when they could have really wrote a warning. You're going to have all types of situations. And that's a discretion thing when you write a warning or talk to somebody, hey, look, in the future, slow down, which is something you can say at any given time. But on the same note, that individual that's looking to get them days off for a month, he ain't writing no warnings, or he's not going to write any warnings or anything like that. That individual is going 100 all day, all night to get to those days off. So it's something to take into consideration. If they actually have incentives like that, you're going to have some foul players in the game. So hopefully, for the most part, that's not the case nowadays, but there were cases like that back in the day. There were a lot of cases like that where you received incentives, and there's no telling what individuals did. Certain arrests maybe could have been avoided, but they ended up being arrests just so that officers to get close to those days off. And you have to be on a case-by-case situation, because everybody doesn't need to be arrested. There are some situations where you can talk to an individual and say, look, man, this is the situation. You can't do this, you can't do that. And some individuals are going to listen. You got to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, some officers are not going to do any of that. Sometimes they get to certain scenes, and I've seen it happen. You locked up. It's like, no talk, no nothing. It's like, man, I'm just explaining. Nah, you locked up. You locked up. No talk. Now, some individuals you'll be able to talk to, but you have to at least try. Sometimes you get a lot by just talking to a person, but a lot of officers are not trained to do that. It's not something that's taught. And in the police academy, if you don't have a personality to talk to a person one-on-one and say, hey, I know how you feel. My vehicle was broken into, so-and-so. In the future, try not to leave anything visible. When that person hears you say, man, the officer's car was broken into, I don't feel so bad. I don't feel so bad. But when you got that so-called straight up A to Z officer that's just going by the book and he's just straight up like a robot. He's not saying anything. He's just saying, for the most part, the basics. What was stolen, and then the next thing you know, they take the report, get an individual with report numbers and leave, instead of giving the individual some advice. Hey, in the future, do this, do that, or just carrying on a conversation with the individual. Nobody's saying go in there and ask about the babies or ask, do you have children on that, but just have a decent, respectful conversation as you take your report, versus making it seem like you're looking down on the individual, or you're carrying it like you don't even really want to be there. People can detect that type of energy. When you get to a scene and you don't really want to be there, it shows. Yeah, you tired. So what? You still getting paid. You on the clock. It's not my fault you didn't get off on time because Joe Blow didn't show up to take his shift. So the midnight shift is short. You were supposed to get off 3 to 11, but now you held over 4 hours and you're gonna get off 2 or 3. That's not the person's problem that you're taking a report. So they shouldn't be showing that type of attitude or that negative energy. And people can detect that. Take the report, be professional, and move on to the next assignment. A lot of times that doesn't happen. Individuals go in there with an attitude, and it shows. It's not the individual's fault that you still are at work at 3 in the morning when you're supposed to get off at 11. You took the job. You signed on the dotted line. You got to deal with the lack of sleep. You got to deal with that. If it's not for you, turn that badge and gun in and resign. And we got a lot of individuals that made it through the cracks, that continue through, and are still on the department to this very day. And I'm not just referring to my department. I'm referring to every department. You got some individuals that are just negative. Should they have a badge and gun? Absolutely not. But what do you do with these individuals? Not necessarily saying that they are committing crimes or things like that, but being non-professional or treating individuals less than normal in a situation when they just basically call for a report, or there's a crime that need to be investigated, and you coming on the scene with attitude. The individual is already a victim. So you coming on the scene with attitude because you're tired, you've been in court all day, you overworked, nobody cares about that. You should be able to deal with that. That's part of the job. But these are the things a lot of times they don't tell you in the academy. They don't tell you prior to you even accepting this job that you're not going to get off. You might work 10 at night to 6 in the morning. And on midnight shift, that was my shift for 29 years straight. Guess what? You may have to go to court. You're not going home if there's a trial starting that next day. You're going to court. And you may get out of court maybe 3 or 4. And maybe you'll get a couple of hours of sleep if you get home. Maybe. And then guess what? You're going back to work that night unless you plan on calling in sick or asking for some leave, which you're not going to do every time that happens, because you'll run out of leave, because you'll have more court and more extended shifts than you will leave. So that's not going to happen. It's something you're going to get used to. And either you're going to get used to it, or you're going to be in a real miserable position, and your misery is going to show toward the citizens and individuals as far as your coworkers that you interact with. So it's a lot of serious issues that need to be addressed, that are not addressed, especially in the academy, especially once you get on the street. Because a lot of times, if you make it to the street, you're appointed to a training officer, a field training officer, FTO. Depending on this FTO, will depend on how good you will be. Some FTOs just collect a check. They don't really want to train, but it's extra money, and they just take the money. So they're not going to go on to certain scenes where there's going to be an arrest or there's going to be major work to be done, because that FTO may have, let's see, depending on who the FTO is, they may have some time on. They may be considered a veteran officer. So they're not going to go out there and get into a whole lot of stuff. Are you going to learn? Some stuff you will, but you're not going to learn that hands-on, because that veteran officer is not going to go out there and find stuff to get into. Now, on the second part of that, you may be placed with a FTO which is fairly young, which can be good. That officer might be aggressive. That might be a go-getter. But on the same note, this officer may not know a whole lot. So he could potentially get the new officer, in some crazy stuff, because the new officer doesn't know anything. Now, I'm thinking I'm learning because I'm with this gung-ho dude, but I'm finding out, wait a minute. This dude is doing traffic stops just because the car didn't look right. Wait a minute, there's no violation. So you sitting there as a new officer, like this how it's supposed to go. This can't be right. So you can question it, but you don't want to make waves because you knew. So you're thinking to yourself, what do I do in this situation? I know this don't seem. I know I got to back him up. I got to get out, but it's just weird. So you ask yourself, what do I do? I know I'm not feeling. I know something is not right with this. This car's only stopping people with tinted windows. Now, granted, some tinted windows, independent on the jurisdiction, you can stop individuals for that. But in a lot of jurisdictions, you have to actually have a moving violation, and then you address the tinted windows. You can't just stop them or her for riding around with tinted windows. And you got some officers that come up with types of bogus stops or imaginary violations. They exist. There are some officers that do that. So I'm not going to stay on too long because I've kind of went longer than I wanted to. But if there are questions or topics that you want to go into, subscribe to the channel, and I'll be going into it. And this is not just for citizens. I'll be addressing a lot of issues that pertain to law enforcement individuals as well. So some law enforcement individuals may want to subscribe, some may not. I encourage citizens and law enforcement individuals to subscribe with questions and things of that nature because they need to be discussed. There are a lot of things that are missing in law enforcement, and there are a lot of things they're missing in society as far as citizens. I'm not just going to come down on law enforcement. I'm going to come down on the citizens too because there are some scenarios that involve shootings that, in my opinion, could have been avoided if some of the individuals had just complied with the officer's commands. Now, if the officer, for example, is telling you to stop, stay over here, I know everything. It seems like, let's go against the police. Everything on TV is screw the police and all that. But on the same note, this individual has a gun and all that, and you going to disobey him and go to the car after he told you don't go to the car and reach for something, I don't recommend doing that. Now, consider the loss or what have you, but why not just obey the commands and live? Living is more important than showing. I showed them police. You see, he told me to come in. I walked away. I snatched away from him. Some things can be avoided. If you suddenly jump in a car and reach for something after the officer told you to, stop resisting or what have you, that could turn out in a negative way. Does that mean that a shooting could be justified or unjustified? It depends on the scenario. But I do know for a fact some things can be avoided if you just obey the officer's commands. Just listen to the officer. If you feel like you need to make a complaint, you violated, he stopped you for your particular race, or you think he was biased, stopped you because you're transgender, what have you, that all can be filed at a later time. But if you don't listen and you reach for something or do something real crazy and get shot in the process and get killed, then it's going to be their word against yours. Then that could go all types of different ways. Why not comply? And if you have a legitimate complaint, file a complaint. Don't talk about what you're going to do. File a complaint. Go to the police district. Ask somebody, can you help me file a complaint? Because talking about it and complaining about police, what the police do, what the police didn't do, that's just talk. If you're just going to talk, it's pointless. There's no need to even complain. Just shut up. Because there's ways to complain. There's ways to make a difference. You can do it. All that, I ain't going to do nothing, because it ain't going to change nothing anyway. Okay, well then why talk about it? You can make a complaint. You can address it. You can address it to see what the follow-up was. And if you don't like that, take it to another level. Hey, well, maybe I need to write to a city councilman. Maybe I need to write to the mayor. Maybe I need to write to the commander of this district. Maybe I need to write to the chief of police. It's not that hard. You don't have to actually physically write a letter. You can do this stuff on your cell phone and send an email. Most individuals got smartphones. So it's no excuse, but it's a lot of stuff that I want to go into. And subscribe to the channel. Write some stuff in the comments. If you like it, dislike it, that's cool with me too, because I can accept it. Again, I've been called everything in the book. 29 years in law enforcement, in the streets of DC, I have been called everything. So dislike the video, you hate all police, that's cool. Just subscribe, because I'm going to discuss everything as far as how some law enforcement officers or situations are screwed up and how some citizens are screwed up. It's no bias against anything, and I'm not pro-police. I did it for a living. don't have any ties with the Metropolitan Police Department or any law enforcement agency. So I'm not going to be leaning toward, oh, well, the Metropolitan Police Department, they don't do anything wrong. I'm not going to be leaning toward the citizens. Well, citizens don't do anything wrong. They just messing with this dude because he was driving this, driving that. Nope. I'm using the straight scenarios and the situations at hand. So subscribe. You got some questions, put them in the comments. If you dislike what I said, put that in the comments. I'm open to it all. And subscribe. Greetings and good night.